Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Comprehension Strategies workshop. My name is Cynthia, one of the instructors with Iris Reading, broadcasting live from Chicago. It was cold yesterday and the day before that, and it's just annoying because, it's May, it's the summertime, but it's nice to see we have some good weather coming our way today. So if you'd maybe like to share where you're joining us from, what's the weather like where you're joining us from, and more importantly, have you ever attended a workshop with us here at Iris Reading? Have we maybe crossed paths? We have taught some of these workshops in over 100 cities around the world, so we might have maybe met once upon a time. If not, that's okay. Now that we can thankfully travel again, travel restrictions are not in place anymore. We are looking to expand. And so, yeah, it's just nice to see if anybody has ever taken a workshop with us. If you've never heard of us, that's fine too, not a problem. We won't be offended. That just means we have to come to a city by you. So today, again, we are talking about comprehension, and maybe comprehension isn't as automatic as you'd like it to be. It's kind of tricky when you're a student and maybe you're learning something brand new and you have no idea how to approach the material. You don't even know what you should be doing in relation to studying. You don't know how to study for this. You don't even know what this all is. And I say this because that's actually what happened to me. My first semester of nursing school, I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I don't know what kind of fantasy I had played in my head that I thought this was going to be, very simple, just a simple schooling, and it was very intense. So if anyone else has been to nursing school or any other kind of school that has completely blown your mind as to how challenging it was, I'm right there with you. And this presentation, this workshop that we have that we'll be discussing today, we created it in March of this year, so it's fairly new. We have seen a lot of good responses from this workshop, so if you do enjoy the material, please share the video, share the link to the recording with anybody. You can also reach out to us as well. I will share our social media, so if you want to see what Iris Reading is doing next, this is a great place to see that. Obviously, we're on YouTube. We are obviously on Instagram as well. We're doing a series on Instagram right now where we present maybe 1 or 2 random facts a day. And it's been interesting to see some of the responses. So if you want some random trivia for your life and maybe impress a friend with a few things that that maybe not your average person knows, then definitely check that out. We are also starting a mini series on TikTok. And we have a book club on Facebook, and it's called Book Lovers Assemble. So if you want to talk about the book that you're reading right now, you're more than welcome to share. I'm actually about to post about this book that I just finished today called Tremendous: The Life of a Comedy Savage by Joey Coco Diaz. And I'll just give you a quick mini review. I could not, stop laughing while reading this book. So really, really funny. I'll be posting about that a little later today. So let's get back into comprehension, okay? We don't always understand when we want to understand, right? That's unfortunate. That just happens. So here is a method, or here's a 6-step process that we encourage you to use so that you can understand a little better, okay? Sometimes we'll just read the passage and we will just sit there and think about what we should be thinking about, or we think about maybe how to better understand, but we don't necessarily know. We don't always learn how to be a good student in school, right? And so we hope that these 6, I like to call them dimensions or approaches to better understand, they help you. Also playing around with the idea of maybe creating like a downloadable worksheet or a sticky note or something that you can use so that as you are going through the material, you can do some self-assessment and see if you are checking off all the dimensions to completely or better understand what you are trying to learn. Okay, now we'll go through them really quickly now, and then we'll dive into them in depth in a moment. So first thing is we want everybody to explain what they're learning. And we don't want you to just explain it to like the wall or the wind. We actually want you to explain it to someone who hopefully doesn't know anything about what you are learning. And we'll elaborate on that in just a moment, the different perspectives on this subject. So if you are reading something, the chances are that there's probably different perspectives or opposing views on what you're reading. All right, and we're actually going to take something that your average person is aware of, feel maybe they have a good understanding on it, and you'd be surprised the opposing views that we found on this subject. We'll talk about your self-knowledge as well, and how as you're learning, you should be tying things back to you, because this is a personal thing. This is how your brain works, seeing that you will take the exam. So we want you to make it all about you. We want you to tap into your feelings as well, and we'd like it if you empathize with the individual that maybe wrote this, the subject itself. How did this even come to be? Who was the person that was like, who discovered this as a field, whatever it is that you're reading, and what made them do that, right? What is the story behind how all of this happened? If you're taking a psychology class, for example, where did this all stem from? Who's the first person to come up with the word psychology, right? As a brief example, maybe we're taking classes and we're like, I don't get it, I don't care. But diving into the history of where this all came from could help pique your interest. Applying this information practically, or how can you apply this in the real world? So again, with the mentality that we don't necessarily like what we're learning, or we don't like that subject. It happens to everyone when we're in school. Mine were math, all of the math classes. I hated them all with a passion. If I had maybe thought about how this would affect me in the future, maybe I would have done a little better, seeing that a big chunk of nursing school is being very good at math with no calculator. So that would have been a great thing to, think about, but of course we had to learn things the hard way. So, and then our last dimension is, how has this been interpreted by others? So you can go one or two ways with this. You can go the route of reading the same material in another language if you speak another language. For example, very basic, if you are maybe a Spanish speaker and you speak English as well, then you know that things are usually can be lost in translation from Spanish to English. Sometimes it feels like the meaning is taken away, right? So you might read that if you are maybe reading the same publication in another language that you may speak. Right, you can go that route, or you can go the route of artistic representation, or musical representation, or dance, right? Sometimes we don't think that we can tie those into what we're learning, but you would be surprised, again, the things that we've been able to discover, the wonders of the internet are just really remarkable. So these are the 6 dimensions that we'll break down. We have one specific subject that I think most people are fairly aware of, so we will break that all down here. But first, we want to see what your current comprehension strategies look like. So if you could please maybe pull those out of your pencil case or your back pocket and put them on your desk. We will do a brief reading exercise now. It will only take 2 minutes. You'll notice you can find that article on irisreading.com/comp for comprehension, and the article that you'll look for is entitled focusrituals.pdf. Okay, so when you pull that up, it'll look like this. You'll notice there's a timer going off in the middle right here. I'll give you 2 minutes, just read normally, and then think about what you read, because I am going to ask you to give me a percentage of what you think your comprehension was from the material you were able to read. So I will disable my webcam. I will start the timer in just a moment. Again, we are going to read for 2 minutes, focus rituals. Go ahead and start. Uh, Sorry about that. Just sneeze. Excuse me. Anyway, okay, so we read, excuse me, for 2 minutes. And now I'm going to ask you to give me a percentage of your comprehension. And the reason we're doing this is because the standardized reading test, which we're not necessarily big fans of here at Iris Reading. Let's say, for example, you're taking a standardized reading exam and you only answer 19 of the 38 questions. You would be scoring at a 50%, right? But let's say that of the 19 you answered, they were all right. So would that be a fair assessment of your comprehension? Now, keeping in mind this stuff is also timed. So, oops, let me turn this on. So it's not always an accurate read, like an accurate assessment of what you truly comprehend, because again, sometimes the questions can be worded funny. Maybe what you're reading and the question itself, sometimes it feels like whoever wrote the questions actually didn't understand the passage, right? Maybe they understood it less than you, but again, that's just kind of how things are. So give me your comprehension percentage. Would you say 60%, 70%, right? The purpose of this is to, again, we're going to check it at the end of the presentation after we discuss the 6 dimensions, and we're going to see if maybe tapping into these other areas you weren't necessarily familiar with can help boost that comprehension score. So the subject that we mentioned we'd be discussing today and we'd be tearing apart with the 6 dimensions is gravity, okay? So most of us are fairly familiar with gravity. You might say, yeah, I know gravity, right? Cool. I'm not saying you don't, but if you do, then could you please explain to me the theory of relativity and how this all works with gravity, or how quantum physics ties into gravity, or even something as simple as how distance, ties into gravity. Now, these are pretty scary questions, right? But again, if we're making the claim that we do understand or comprehend the subject of gravity, then we should hypothetically be able to answer this, right? So that introduces our very first dimension, which is that of explaining it. And we mentioned in the beginning, we don't want you to explain it to the wall or anything like that. We want you to explain it to people, because, and specifically to people who have no idea what you're talking about, because that will cause a reaction of them asking questions, and that's what we want. Because again, we want them to poke holes into what you think you know. You may not know it as well as you think you do. Also, sometimes when we're explaining things, we might fall into the habit of just repeating something that we memorized from the text, but we haven't put it in our own words. We haven't simplified it. We haven't explained it. For example, this reminds me of that explain like I'm five thing on Reddit. It's like a just a series of questions that are explained as if you were explaining it to a 5-year-old. So something maybe really complex, like how vitamins work in the body. You can find that on Reddit under that explain like I'm five tag. So you know, this is something you want to do when you are learning. You want to explain it in complex terms. You want to explain it in simple terms. You want to prove to yourself that you really do understand this. You can explain it to other people, and you're not just repeating what you read in the textbook or what you memorized off of a flashcard. And the simple answer of, well, that's just how things are. For example, if you say, oh, well, gravity is, you know, what goes up comes, it has to come down, right? Everything that goes up in the air, it needs to float. It needs to not float, sorry. It needs to hit the ground again. So if someone asks, okay, well, then why does the ball roll down the hill, or why will it run down the driveway? Like, explain it. And just the simple answer of, well, that's just how things are, that's not a good enough answer. That actually proves that you don't understand it, right? So we want to make sure that you explain it, and you explain it well. So notice also, we will be asking many questions throughout the presentation, and we will not answer them, because we want you to, you know, gain some interest into researching. And our goal for next week is to take a different subject and break that apart as well. So we're still playing around with what will be next week's theme. Again, we want to make this a series. So this week was gravity. If you cannot explain why the ball rolls down the driveway or down the hill, then we're gonna have some unofficial homework for next week, okay? Again, piquing your interest, so we can Google these answers, read about these answers, okay? So this is the first dimension, which is explaining something, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people stop diving deeper after they think they can successfully explain something. And that's only 1/6 of what we want you to do. So we want you to keep on going. The second being the different perspectives on this subject. So being able to see what the opposing side's views are, you don't necessarily have to agree, you don't have to convert, but it's good to see what they think and why they think that. Okay, so we are talking about gravity, and lo and behold, there are organizations that claim that gravity is a complete lie. They are called the Anti-Gravity Alliance. This is real. This is just a screenshot of what their website looks like. On here it says, substantial scientific evidence has been found that gravity does not exist. In fact, there is more evidence that gravity doesn't exist than that it does. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind. And if you think, oh, well, this is just them, no, it isn't. There are many websites that support the AGA, or the Anti-Gravity Alliance. And so if you are maybe looking to see who supports them, like I see the Scientology website is on there. That's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so There's answeringisgenesis.org. We did dive into a few of these websites just to see what was up, and it was some interesting information. Okay, but we're not going to stop here because there are more organizations that claim now or that state that gravity is actually only a theory and not necessarily a fact. So this is coming from the National Center of Science Education. So the pickle I'm finding in this all is that we believe in gravity, right? But this institution or this center is claiming that it's a theory only. So when you think that something is a fact versus a theory, there's a little bit of a problem there, right? Let's keep going. We also have individuals who are submitting dissertation for PhD, and they're calling gravity a myth. And we found an astrophysicist on YouTube. His name is Dr. Brian Keating, and he stated that he does not believe in gravity. And speaking of, we'd love to have him on our we're playing around with having a podcast as well, and we would love to have an expert in the field come on and share why he doesn't believe. I did hear the video; it's a short video, but again, just having a conversation to see where that comes from. So we got all this information saying no, gravity is not true. So maybe now you might be thinking, maybe we'll just do a little research and see where this all came from, right? Again, not trying to convert you, not trying to change your point of view, but are you able to stand your ground when someone comes after what they claim to be a lie, like gravity? Okay, so that's a good one. It can help you understand what you think you know. It can help you understand what they claim to know. And again, deepen that understanding. So this is our second dimension, the different perspectives. Okay, let me see something right here. Moving on to the third dimension, which is that of self-knowledge. Let me just adjust my mic here 1 second. Sorry about that, just had a little problem with my mic. So self-knowledge is our third dimension, and we want you to think about you here. It's all about you always, okay? Especially when you're learning. So how does this work when we're learning something new? Well, we want you to look for some function and purpose in your day-to-day life. Now, this is simple to do with certain topics and maybe not so simple with other ones. With gravity, something as simple as, right, we know that the phone is going to fall. If you use eye drops, for example, you know that the eye drops are going to fall into your eyeballs and not float up to space. We know that. That's just something we know. So taking a moment to see how it ties into your day-to-day life, very important, okay? So that is our third dimension. Now we want to get into empathy, okay? And this might be hard to do if you maybe just don't care for the subject, but hear us out. So again, remember, so we did say the eye drops, right, falling into the eyeball. That's gravity, right? It's doing what it's got to do. So again, just a simple application with gravity. Moving on to empathy. Okay, tapping into those feelings. Now, how can we empathize with gravity? Okay, so let's think about this. Let's think about maybe individuals that have to go through some pretty long periods of time with less gravity than we have here on Earth, right? And also, what kinds of functions may be harder to do in space, right, where there's less of a pull, right? We're talking about our astronauts, and so let's think about this. So when we may do a lot of things down here on Earth that we don't necessarily think about how they could affect an astronaut, for example. Simple things, right? But have you ever wondered about what it's like to maybe take a shower up in space? So he's obviously floating away here in our slide. What could that look like up in space? Well, we did find a little clip. I do follow some astronauts on TikTok, and it's very cool to see. They actually posted a video of what it's like to do some self-care up in space. I'm not sure if you can hear this video, but I'm going to test it out. If anything, you can see the actual video and you can see what is happening. So let's go ahead and watch this. Okay. So you guys probably can't hear it, but if you could see this whole process, this is this is so much to look at. This is like, wow, not having running water, and now she's drying her hair, and that's okay. I can watch this all day. But the point is, you don't have running water up in space, so she's got to use what looks like a Capri Sun bottle, squirts that warm water into her scalp, uses the dry shampoo or the no rinse shampoo, she called it. She works it into her scalp. She works it up the ends of her hair. I can only imagine what this is like for someone that has thick, curly hair. What is the process like? I mean, wow. Now I think I take for granted my shower that I have down here on Earth. So can we maybe now empathize with astronauts a little bit more? I can definitely, yes, right? What are some other things that we do down here on Earth that they probably can't do up there? Well, they can probably do it, but maybe not as easily. Something that I read recently was about, and this may spark some additional questions in your brain. So again, purpose is to pique that creativity or that curiosity so that you can research some of this. I think it was something like, have you ever wondered what happens when you burp up in space? Like when you burp. And the article, it was something about how the gases in your intestines will create something called chunky bubbles. So we won't keep going with this explanation, but the point is that's maybe something you've never thought about before, right? So maybe we empathize a little bit more with our astronauts up in space. So that is empathy, right? You might find this to be a rather enjoyable exercise, specifically when you're maybe tired of reading through the textbook, maybe just finding a video or something on YouTube that can show you a little bit more about what you're learning. Because again, sometimes we can obsess over reading the textbook 10, 20 times, and that can be very hard on the brain, and it can be very hard for you to pay attention as well. So just switching gears, you're still studying technically, right? You're just thinking about another area of that specific field. Okay, so Moving on to the next dimension, we will discuss practical application. Okay, and again, this might be easier to do with certain subjects and harder with different subjects. So something as simple as, with gravity, how is this applied in the larger world? Well, we know if we're going to throw something up in the air, it's going to come crashing down, right? A ball, a book, whatever it is. Probably shouldn't throw books, but a ball, if you throw it, it will hit the ground, right? And so that is simple, but again, remember, we don't always love every subject we're learning. So it's easy to cop the mentality of, well, I don't need to know this. I'll never need to know this. This isn't important. When does anyone use algebra in the real world? Just wait and see. Okay, so think about that. If you really are, that is a serious question, Google it, and you'd be surprised everything that ties into algebra specifically. And I think that if I had maybe thought about this a little bit more, maybe I wouldn't have had such a hard time in nursing school. There was a little bit of an overlap there, and so it's just something to keep in mind. Again, we should keep an open mind when we're reading and learning things in classrooms. Just give it a shot. Sometimes we just automatically we're like, no, but give it a shot, give it a shot. Okay, so this is our practical application. And our final dimension that we'll talk about is this interpretation. Okay, so how has this been interpreted by others? Whether we are talking about this through literature, whether we're talking about this through art, through music, through dance, how has it been interpreted? Now, we're talking about gravity, and there's a lot of art that is inspired by gravity, but we also found a whole line of sculptures that fall under the category of gravity-defying art or gravity-defying sculptures. So this sculpture, for example, is called The Force of Nature by Lorenzo Quinn, and this is in Shanghai. Again, we're thinking about gravity and we're like, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to stay upright. It should topple over, right? With everything we know that we actually do on a day-to-day basis down here on Earth regarding gravity, we're familiar with how this should work. So this doesn't necessarily make sense, but this is a real sculpture, okay? So with this one in the Fontainebleau in Paris, I don't know what amount of crazy glue or like Gorilla Glue or any kind of glue. There's no amount of glue that can hold that up, right? So there's got to be something going on here that we're not aware of, because just not understanding how this is gravity defying, right? What is going on here? Also, I'd be pretty terrified to walk around that sculpture. Here are the floating rocks in Cairo, and fun fact, we've also had participants that have attended this specific workshop that helped with the installation of these sculptures in Egypt, so that was really cool. But again, just seeing these floating rocks, it doesn't make sense in your brain. You're trying to figure out why this is what this is, right? So right, just giving us a different take on the subject that we've been talking about all morning, which is gravity, right? And this is our favorite sculpture. These are in Madrid, Spain, these beautiful book sculptures. I want one of these for my office. I think this is so cool. Imagine doing a webinar and having this giant pillar next to me with books coming out of the ground or coming out of the ceiling. Anyway, gravity-defying sculptures, okay? Now, if you maybe don't want to look at sculptures or art, there are other, like if you get on YouTube, we found a couple of like dances, interpretive dance inspired by gravity. We've also found a couple of compositions, orchestral compositions by a composer by the name of Gustav Holst, who wrote a whole score on the planets. And even though it isn't necessarily gravity, like we know everybody up there in space works together, so they're cousins, right? And so this is a nice piece to hear. It's called The Planets, I believe, and there's one piece for each of the planets. It's just something interesting, right? This is all it works hand in hand with what we're talking about today, which again is gravity. So now let's do a quick rundown of each of the dimensions, and let's make sure that if you are taking notes, you have them all down. First being, we want you to explain what you're learning to a friend, to a teacher, to your 5-year-old sister, to whoever, okay? So that they can ask you questions. 2, we want the different perspectives on this subject. So what are the opposing views, right? Check and see. Think about the Anti-Gravity Alliance. Probably wouldn't have thought that, right? Probably wouldn't have heard that before, but here you go. Number 3, your self-knowledge. We want to tie things back to you. What do you do on a day-to-day basis? How is your life affected by the subject that you're learning, right? Moving on to the next one, which is empathy. So we watched that video on TikTok about the astronaut that is washing her hair up in space. I definitely can empathize with that, seeing that I have long, curly, thick hair. So that, I don't think it would work for me if I was up in space. I might have to maybe do something else. I don't know, but that seems very tricky. So you think about what are some other things that maybe you like to do down here that might be a little more challenging to do up in space. All right, that empathy. Oh, it really got to me. Moving on to the next one is practical application, especially when we're learning things we don't like. And that's okay to not like them, but let's try to find a way to like them, okay? Let's try to see how we can make them our friends when we're learning, again, about algebra or anything like that. And our final dimension was artistic rendition, right? Or artistic representation. How has this been interpreted by others? We talked about the sculptures, right? And how these sculptures all around the world, you have gravity-defying sculptures, interesting, just to kind of think about where this all came from, how this happened, who did this, what's inside the sculptures that's allowing them to stay upright, right? Are we using magnets, for example? Who knows? But again, those were our 6 dimensions. Now, we want to tap into something else that helps with comprehension, and that is of inspecting before you read. Okay, so we talk about this in our speed reading workshop, which is actually what we're known for here at Iris Reading. We are the kings and queens of speed reading. Definitely recommend you check out our speed reading workshop taught by the founder and CEO, Paul Novak. He is really amazing when teaching these workshops, but something that he developed while creating this speed reading workshop is this principle of inspecting before you read. And this helps with comprehension again, because it's giving you like an appetizer before you dive into the entree, right? So when we are inspecting, these are the things we want to look for. We want to look for the intro, headings and subheadings, words in bold, titles of charts, tables, and diagrams, the conclusion, as well as any questions that may be published in this piece. So all of this we're looking for before we start to read. Now, most of us are probably used to reading from beginning to end, but this will help boost our comprehension and our attention as well. Now we're going to test this out. We're going to inspect something together. I will inspect with you. So it looks like, by the way, if you are looking to pull this doc up on your end, if you want to maximize your screen, you can find it again at irisreading.com/comp with the, and then go under where it says flow.pdf, that document. And while we inspect this, so it's called Going with the Flow. It says, life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like. Aha, by Lao Tzu. Number 1, realize that you can't control everything. Number 2, become aware. Number 3, breathe. Number 4, get perspective. 5, practice. 6, laugh. 7, realize that you can't control others. This passage is selected from the book Focus, a Simplicity Manifesto in the Age of Distraction by Leo Babauta. By the way, if you would like a copy of the book, I will share my email at the end of the presentation. Feel free to reach out to me and I can send that to you. The author has actually given us permission to share this, so you are more than welcome to a free copy if you would like it. Now, we inspected, we are going to finish reading this article, okay? So I will disable my webcam. You'll notice the timer going off in the top middle. Okay, so here we go. We're going to assess our comprehension the second round around, and we're going to see if it is a little better than the first time. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Okay, very good. So that was our second drill, okay? So now let's think about some of these dimensions we talked about initially. So we're talking about or reading going with the flow. So how can we empathize? Let's just pull one of them. Can we empathize with Leo Barbato when he wrote this? Did he see someone going through a hard time? Was he going through a hard time? Why did he write this? Right? What are the different perspectives? Do you feel like there are some people that would say, nah, I don't know about this guy. Maybe he's taking a too lenient of an approach, or maybe too harsh of an approach, right? So again, we're just thinking about this from another. Sorry, I thought. Oh, I am so sorry. My allergies are just taking over. So again, we're just thinking about these other dimensions. We're thinking about how maybe this could apply to our lives on a day-to-day basis. If you feel like you got a lot going on and maybe you needed to read something like this, that might be good too. So again, practical application. So we just took 3 of the dimensions and it was really fast. Okay, so maybe now let's get a second assessment of your comprehension. Give me a percentage. Tell me what you think. Do you feel like your comprehension reading a totally different article boosted after obviously talking about the dimensions that boosted your comprehension skills? Do you feel like it's a little bit higher the second time than your first time? Again, this is the first time that many of us are probably ever doing something like this, so it might take a little practice, and that's why we're playing around with creating like a worksheet or something that you could download so that you can go through your material and go through these 6 dimensions every time you're reading and learning something. So just an idea we're playing around with. So if you made an improvement, you get the success, baby. If you didn't make the improvement, that's okay as well. This is a lot of work early in the morning. We're talking about comprehension, and I think as soon as you mention that to students, everybody wants to slide down their chair, right? So we're trying to make reading and learning fun again. So not a problem. I commend you for sitting through the presentation, and it just means we have to work a little bit more, okay, a little harder on this. So, and remember, inspecting is essentially just getting the gist of what you're reading first, okay? we're going to introduce our IRIS method, and this will really tie everybody together, everything together. So we talk about inspecting in our speed reading workshop. You're more than welcome to check that out. We talk about how you should inspect anything you need to read before you read it. So you inspect it, you ask, you go through the pictures, you go through the headings, just like we talked about. And this is all everything you're looking for first. Okay, we don't want you to just start reading the book from beginning to end. We want you to inspect it and then decide if you're going to read it or not. You might find that you don't have to read that, okay? And that happens specifically for college students. Sometimes we receive these like books and articles that we need to read and journals, and we're like, this has nothing to do with what is this, right? So inspecting can help save us a lot of time as well. We want you to ask questions, which is what we talked about today. You ask all of the questions and make sure you can answer them. Because if you can't answer them, you should not move on to the final step, which is storing this information. Whether you're storing it on paper or you're storing it in your memory, point being, we want you to store this, but we don't want you to store it if you don't understand it. If you don't understand it, we got to move back to reading it, and we have to make sure we are asking the appropriate questions. And if you're not sure what questions you should be asking, remember our 6 dimensions that will break down again and create a little bit of a system for you so you know how to approach this material. Now, if you would like a copy of the book, Focus, A Simplicity Manifesto in the Age of Distraction by Leo Babauta, you can send me an email, cynthia@irisreading.com, and I can get that to you today. Just let me know you were in the session, you viewed the presentation, and we can get that to you, not a problem. Thank you all once again for coming. That wraps up our presentation. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat or send them to me in an email, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Again, if you did enjoy, please check out our social media. Please like or subscribe or join the Iris Reading family. We would really appreciate that. And we hope to see you in a future workshop, everyone. Thanks for stopping by.